Well, good evening and welcome everyone. My name is Brendan Hunter. I am a program director at the Episcopal Church Foundation, joining you from ECF's office in New York. So glad you're taking the time out of your schedules today to be a part of the first ECF book club featuring Living on the Border of the Holy, Renewing the Priesthood of All. Before just we get started, I just want to go over a few technical notes. Miguel, I don't know if you can back that up by one slide just to that. But I believe we've got everybody on with the chat box, which is great. If you would like a copy of the slides to download, you can do that right now. There's a link in the top of the chat box. But you know that everyone who's registered for the webinar will also receive a follow-up email to a link to where you can download that, as well as find a recording of this webinar. ECF records all of our webinars to make those available later for folks. So please do keep that in mind, particularly if you have any questions that may be sensitive or confidential in nature. We're always happy to follow up with you after the webinar with anything like that. So thanks. So go ahead and move that forward. So again, thanks and welcome to this webinar. We'll go and fast forward to the next one. Just want to give a quick introduction to anyone who may not be familiar with ECF. The Episcopal Church Foundation was founded in 1949. We are an independent lay-led organization whose mission is to strengthen the leadership, strategic, and financial resources of Episcopal congregations, dioceses, and other Episcopal organizations. You can see our desired impacts on your screen, and we do our work through a variety of programs, including such services as capital campaigns, endowment management solutions, planned giving, our new donor advised fund, strategic solutions, which I'll talk a little bit about in a sec. In our leadership resources, we have a variety of publications, including ECF Vital Practices Online, which I hope you all subscribe to, our vestry resource guide, Fellowship Partners Program, all sorts of great stuff. If you haven't gone to the ECF website, go to episcopalfoundation.org to find out more about all those programs, and of course to check out other webinars and upcoming events. Right now, at this time of the year, I would just like to note in particular and highlight for you our Strategic Solutions program, which also features ECF First Step. As we all know, life can be challenging in the life of a congregation, so sometimes you may need to figure out, well, where do we need to go? What sort of work do we need to be undertaking? There is a great free online resource which you can use and fill out as a group or as an individual that takes you through a series of questions to figure out what is that next step that you should be taking in terms of the work that you need to be doing. So again, check out the ECF website to learn more about that. So without further ado, I will hand it over to our presenters this evening, Donald and Miguel.
Thank you, Brendan. My name is Donald Romanick, and I am president of the Episcopal Church Foundation. I'm going to facilitate this book discussion today. And let us start with prayer. Gracious God, we thank you for all the blessings of this life, especially for your risen Son, our Savior, Jesus Christ. During this holy Eastertide, keep us mindful of our baptismal covenant, our promises to love and serve you, and engage in your mission in the world. This we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Donald. So we'll be hearing from Donald more in just a moment. I want to also introduce myself. My name is Miguel Escobar. I'm a managing program director here. And I wanted to just say a few words about, just kind of give us a sense of what we're going to be doing this evening and what we'll be discussing. Just a few words about what this book club is. This is a new project. We're trying it out here at ECF. And what we wanted to do was to try to identify classic texts, like Living on the Border of the Holy, which have had continuing value and continue to have something to teach the wider church and merit dusting off the bookshelf or reading for the first time. Just a few words about the author, which you may or may not already know. L. William Countryman, or Bill Countryman as he is known, is an ECF fellow, actually, from 1973, and a priest of the Episcopal Church. He is also an emeritus professor of biblical studies at the Church Divinity School of the Pacific in Berkeley, California, and has written a number of other books, including, I think, one of his most famous, Dirt, Greed, and Sex, Ethics in the New Testament, which is a book that's had a lot of readers throughout the years. After, just in a moment, we're going to hear Donald's 5 takeaways, and then we're going to open it up for you, the readers, to send in your questions, make your comments about your own takeaways and critiques of the book as well. Afterwards, I have a little excerpt from the book that I wanted to read and get your thoughts on, and then we'll round it all out by talking about next steps. So it's going to be a mixture, a little bit of a mixture of presentation, but also plenty of time for discussion. So I hope you can be kind of thinking of some of your comments and questions, because I'd love to hear them. And we want to have a lively discussion tonight. So with that, let's start with Donald's 5 takeaways.
Thank you, Miguel. Now, obviously, this book is chock full, and I know that Sandy said she read it twice, and it's probably one of those books you kind of pick up periodically and you get new insights. Reading it for the first time over the past couple of weeks, I just thought I would highlight 5 ideas in no particular order that I thought were especially maybe interesting or compelling or warranted further conversation or feedback. And I don't necessarily agree with everything that Bill says in his book, but I thought it really raised some really compelling issues. Also interesting, the book was published in 1999, and Miguel mentioned dusting old books off the bookshelf. One of the things I'd like to kind of engage people in is, are there parts of this book or some of his thoughts that maybe aren't quite as relevant or meaningful given where we are as a church in the world in 2017? But let's go through some of his basic premises. He clearly talks about kind of the fundamental priesthood, and he mentions it being an inescapable part of being human. He talks about ministry, priesthood being the ministry that introduces us to arcana, hidden things or secrets. Interestingly, when I read that, I was reminded of the Collect for Purity. Oh God, you know the secrets of our hearts. Secrets being an important part of how we connect with the holy. And this fundamental priesthood, which belongs to everyone, he mentions that the only absolute qualification of being a priest in this fundamental priesthood is an insight that comes from some encounter with the holy. I also think that his reference to border is also interesting. We're hearing a lot about border now in the context of kind of immigration and the controversy around that. But border for Countrymen is a place of intense vitality, as opposed to the concept of borders being something that separates us one world from another. In other words, we want to be around the border because that's where we experience the holy and the divine. He obviously then moves to the idea of moving from fundamental priesthood, which requires no ordination, to the sacramental priesthood, which is deeply embedded in the Institute of Religion. He defines the ordained person as an icon of the whole people of God that helps us deal with our own experiences on the border with the holy. And that one of the purposes of the priest, the sacramental priest, and sacraments is to help us kind of reconnect with our own border and holy experiences. What Countryman says is that the sacramental priest is not introducing us to some new concept or element of God's presence in the community, but is basically helping the community, the people of God, focus on the presence of the holy that's already there. He says, because what is everywhere is hard to see anywhere. And therefore, the sacraments are one way to help us refocus on sometimes this almost unnoticed concept of grace. He obviously spends time on Jesus and Jesus's ministry, especially in the context of fundamental priesthood versus sacramental priesthood. And he basically says, and I think most people would agree, that Jesus did not serve in the traditional sense as a sacramental priest. In fact, he had no specific commissioning, and he framed his teachings very much in opposition, if not challenging, the authority of the day. And some even kind of questioned his credentials to be called a rabbi or a teacher, which was a common term used by people who talked about God at that time. And Jesus never referred to himself as a rabbi, or he did sometimes call himself teacher. But the more common thing that Countryman says is he referred to himself as the Son of Man, which obviously has a kind of profound theological context. But Countryman refers to the Son of Man as just being a human being. At the time of Jesus, obviously the common or the established priesthood was that of the priesthood of the temple, who oversaw the sacrifices that were a part of temple worship and an obligation of devout Jews. Countryman, however, suggests that rather than the priesthood of the temple, Jesus belongs to the older, enduring, more significant priesthood, the order of Melchizedek. At this point, Countryman refers to Paul's letter to the Hebrews, where the purpose of the priest is to stand alongside others in the presence of the holy. I really like that metaphor of the priest kind of being our companion and maybe helping us to further clarify the holy that we've already experienced. But yet, even with Jesus, as with all of our encounters with holy, we find it difficult to stay or remain in the presence of the holy. And therefore, with Jesus and with other encounters, we must and we do construct religious models. Hence the need and the role of sacramental priests. The next takeaway, he talks about the whole issue of the formation of priests, both the fundamental priesthood and the sacramental priesthood. And he basically kind of challenges traditional theological education of the priest, at least in the context of when he was writing this in 1999. He also says that one of the big problems is our tendency to kind of look at traditional theological education as the primary role of the sacramental priest, as opposed to the role of all Christian believers, all people involved in the fundamental priesthood. And he even suggests, more opportunities for joint participation of clergy and laity in renewing the richer and more ancient traditions of theological reflection. I'd like to kind of engage people in this, but he seems, at least in this chapter, to kind of talk about the ancient practices, the ancient teachings of our faith that are the province of both, the province and role of both lay and clergy people to learn together, to master, and to pass on. He makes a point that I think Miguel's quote is going to reflect is, has the clergy job description become so all-encompassing that the job is now beyond human doing? And I think for this reason, he seems to somewhat narrow the role of the sacramental priest to be that companion, the person who walks with us on this issue, on this journey of being at the border and experiencing the holy. I'm not sure I agree with this premise, and we can talk more about it. And finally, he talks about the tendency to define lay and clergy as opposites. He even suggests that we need to kind of eliminate the word laity altogether, and clearly suggests and clearly affirms that the priesthood, the sacramental priesthood, is collegial, and it always implies that all of our lives, whether we're ordained or not ordained, part of this fundamental priesthood, are interconnected and interdependent. What this reminded me was, our Anglican theology of the priesthood of all believers. And while these are kind of loaded terms, or maybe 50-cent terms, I often like to use the word bishops and presbyters and deacons rather than priests, because back to Countryman's underlying premise, we are all priests in the priesthood of all believers. One area of the book that I especially found very, very engaging, and you can spend a whole evening just talking about that, is Countryman's whole notion of discernment, and how both both lay and clergy people need to engage in a process of discernment, and even suggests how that happens in community, and how people may discern a call to sacramental priesthood as opposed to the priesthood that we are all called to by virtue of our humanity. So those were some of the kind of takeaways that I kind of reflected on, that I wanted to share with you. But now I'd like to see whether people have other takeaways, whether they even liked the book, whether they found it compelling, whether they found my takeaways to be something that resonated with them.
Great. And Brendan, I'm wondering if you could just give a reminder for folks of how they can participate and maybe even raise their hand.
Yes, so in the upper left-hand side of your screen, there are buttons there to raise your hand and also to utilize the chat box. So if you would like to speak, we can unmute you if you're raising your hand. Also do take advantage of the chat box at any point, actually throughout this entire time. And if there's something else happening at the time, Miguel and I will be monitoring the chat box to ensure that your questions and comments are attended to. For those on Facebook Live as well, if you're tuning in through there, we'll also be monitoring the comments there, so you can also submit your questions and comments directly on Facebook.
Great. And so it's basically, I mean, it's really your turn. I would love to hear in the chat box, as Donald said, was this a good experience of reading for you? Were there some takeaways for you as well. I guess I hope we're getting some comments through. I'm wondering, Donald, I guess as a lay person, I'm wondering if what for you really, I guess, what did this book mean for you as a lay person who's been around the church for a very long time?
Yeah, and as you know, ECF, we are, when Brendan described us, we are a lay-led organization. And that means that all our board of directors are lay people. We're the only kind of national, broader church organization that has that governance structure. And as I say to people, it's not that we're anti-clerical. In fact, some of our best friends are clergy. It's just that, part of our charism, part of our history is kind of this whole idea of ministry of all the baptized. I guess what I especially found compelling about it, and this is the first time I read it, even though I was aware of it and it's been on my bookshelf for a lot of years, was basically kind of affirming from his kind of theological perspective a lot of the things that I've been thinking about and talking about and teaching about and preaching about. So the idea of, the priesthood of all believers, or his fundamental priesthood. I guess what my concern, and I guess maybe some of it is, the snapshot in time, is while I think a role of the priest is clearly to kind of walk alongside us lay people on our experiences of the border and the holy, I think given the demands and needs of a changing church and world, I think we need a little bit more from our sacramental priests. There almost seems to be, I'll be open to pushback, that he's almost seems to suggest almost a more ascetic, monastic, kind of spiritual director or spiritual counselor role for a priest, almost as the exclusive, if not primary role, to the exclusion of others. Now, again, that might be my own interpretation. There's some interesting comments that I'd like to reference. The translation of the words teacher and a rabbi being confused. Yeah, and maybe people who are kind of more knowledgeable about this issue could be helpful on that. I think in the early writings, or even in scripture, teacher and rabbi are often used interchangeably depending on the translation. And I think during the time of the temple priesthood, rabbis were basically kind of the teachers in the community, as opposed to the clergy in charge as they are now in the more contemporary. Is priesthood essentially political? I like that. Is priesthood then become, it's interesting because Countryman seems to say that we as human beings needed to establish religion because we needed some way of enhancing or explaining our experience of the holy. And we needed sacraments and rituals to help us along that way. And then we needed to find people who, either felt called or skilled, or we set them apart to do that. Is that, in essence, one of the roles of quote unquote politicians? In kind of the classic democracy, every citizen has a right to participate in the process. But does that become so overwhelming that we need to anoint people we consider to be professionals to kind of make decisions on behalf of us? And Countryman talks about the kind of professionalization of the clergy, or is it just become a matter of kind of logistics that we need to set apart professionals or certain people to do these tasks because it's the only way they'll get done. I don't know. Anybody else on that? I like Sandy's, not sure many lay people really appreciate their fundamental priesthood. And maybe you know, maybe I'm kind of contradicting myself, but maybe one of the roles, that's not the first time, maybe one of the roles of the sacramental priest, even using Countryman's premise, is to remind us of our fundamental priesthood. So while that person is standing alongside us, that person, the role of the priest is to remind us and maybe give us permission if we need permission, or empower us if we need empowerment to exercise that in a more profound way. But I guess being a much more active type of person, and even in terms of my spirituality, my experience of the holy on the border is a lot more active and overt and transactional, interactional, relational. So maybe people like me need priests who are going to engage me in those kinds of very active types of experiences of the holy. And maybe I need to reread that section from my own perspective, because that's when I got kind of lost or turned off a little bit.
Yeah, Lyle brought up a really, I think, interesting point about the priesthood as political. In reading through the quite beautiful descriptions of the fundamental priesthood as well as the sacramental priesthood, to say I didn't hear much about I didn't really hear much about the role of the priest in relationship to the political sphere in general. And I think part of the point, and he kind of refined it a little bit later, is now that we're not in 1999 but in 2017, this particular moment, what is the role of the fundamental priesthood as well as the sacramental priesthood, and sort of our moral obligations in the political sphere? I don't seem to recall that that being really discussed extensively. So I don't know, Donald, if you have some thoughts on that. Others have thoughts on that from the group.
Well, if we're back to the premise of the border, and if the border is a place of intense vitality where you experience the holy, and there are political or outside forces or powers that are interfering with that ability to experience the holy, priests have a role then to kind of help us discern. So what is standing in the way of your experiencing the holy? And you say, well, the world is screwed up, the country is screwed up, our leaders are not supporting or responding to the way we feel we need to experience the holy, where there's truth, there's justice, there's people's needs are met. So even if, Miguel, I guess my point, I'm not speaking for him, but my point would be that even if you're looking at Countryman's words as they're described, if you're walking alongside people, and maybe back, to use a metaphor, if the border has a big wall that's preventing you from experiencing the holy, one of the roles of the priest is to help you advocate or make the wall go away so that your experience is enhanced. So, I mean, that's just one way of looking at it, even based on his underlying premise.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any thoughts on that? Positive Christianity was a movement during the Nazi period. Boy, talking about a period of time where having experiences of the holy was very, very challenging. And then you get some really, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, for example, kind of the classic sacramental priest or rabbi or whatever during the Nazi period, articulating an incredibly powerful message for people who were clearly stuck or had barriers to experiencing the holy. So
there are also a number there are a number of comments about from Linda and Sandy. Priests have highs and lows in their life. And we have several spiritual people in our congregation who cover the lows, and sometimes just start the highs of the church. That was for me as a layperson, Linda. That was one of the most. I thought that was one of the most beautiful sections of the book. Was when a countryman who is a priest talked about how there were times in his ministry when he realized that the person or the person who had the deepest connection to the borderland of the holy was a layperson in the community, he really encouraged priests to not be threatened by that, but to see it as a resource for the life of the community. And to really see that person as an example and someone who can model that more fundamental priesthood. I don't know if you're up for speaking and using the microphone, but I'd love to just hear a little bit more about your context in your congregation, about how that's experienced. Those sort of having some spiritual people in your congregation who serve in that role. What would for others? Okay. Let me see if I can. I'm sorry. Now I think you're unmuted. Sorry.
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Okay, great.
We're very fortunate that we're a mission church, and we serve a fairly large area in New Jersey. But one of the things that we've been able to do is we have a healing service that meets goes to other church. It's always at our church, but people from other churches come to our church. But during our early mass, which is at 8 o'clock, I'm seldom at the 10 o'clock, but there are people who will stand up and ask, will say a prayer for a particular group, and nobody seems to be bothered by that. And the same thing when we have coffee hour. People will talk about subjects that are really very important to them, and they're never the only time they've ever been shut down, and unfortunately, is by a couple of visiting priests.
Oh.
Who felt that they were the ones that should be expounding on where Jesus is in our lives and how we should respond. Otherwise, we've been very blessed, even though we've been going through priests every 2 or 3 years. We've been very blessed by having some very open-minded ones who have accepted the fact that some of our members are going to stand up and in the middle of, not in the middle of the service, but in the spaces between one thing and another, so that they can say things, and ask for prayers, or not feel awkward about going across an aisle and holding somebody's hand while they express some, pain in their life. We're not a big church. That's why we're still a mission church. But I think that the fact that St. Stephen's is very open to whatever people have to say, and nobody's judged. And we're politically very divided in our area. So, but people don't seem to take that personally and that. So it makes it nice. And we're growing. We're getting children. We have a Sunday school and things like that, but we just don't seem to get that magic number that you need to become a parish. And I don't know if it would be good or bad for us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Miguel, if Countryman talks about the priesthood being interconnected and interdependent, which in my mind kind of implies that there are times that the sacramental priest is also going to need someone to walk alongside of him or her to experience the holy. I mean, I think the problem, one thing that leads to any kind of burnout, leadership burnout, clergy burnout, is if you think you always have to be the person who is, strong and in charge and invulnerable and, preaching and teaching and being positive. It's risky. It's risky and often, priests who do express some semblance or sense of vulnerability often will get either shot down or exploited, or there are lay people who kind of pounce. So I think the solution to that then is to do more preaching and teaching about this idea of interdependent collegial leadership priesthood. Maybe not the whole world isn't ready to hear, we're all priests and I'm just kind of a sacramental priest. But I think the whole world is ready to hear that we're in this together. And that, whether it's even collaborative leadership teams, which is something ECF, advocates through our Vital Teams initiative, I think it ultimately creates an atmosphere when the sacramental priest needs to be vulnerable or needs someone else to kind of be the quote unquote spiritual leader at the border for the moment, that there's a natural order for that to happen.
I agree. I think Sandy, I really like your note about there being a risk of vulnerability in both that fundamental priesthood and sacramental priesthood, and to be interdependent with any other person is a risk. I was thinking about your previous comment about how sometimes laity are more than happy to kind of push onto the sacramental priests all the roles and responsibilities and sort of the moral rectitude of being a Christian, and we can kind of sit back and watch. The idea that we also have a fundamental priesthood to play out is actually it's a big challenge. It's a much more active sort of role than I think oftentimes we're quite ready to take on or accustomed to.
And I think one very simple way of kind of starting this process is to encourage people, including the sacramental priest. Now I'm going to kind of have to refer to sacramental priests. We're going to come up with new nomenclature, and people give me strange looks. Are you a sacramental priest or a fundamental priest? But I mean, creating opportunities for people to tell their stories and their faith journeys. And whether that is in a vestry meeting, whether that's in small group discussions, when people tell their stories, even if it's something simple about, tell us about where you grew up or where you went to school or about your experience here at the church, it's an opportunity for people to not only be a little vulnerable, but to connect with someone saying, gee, I've had a similar experience. So if the priest is telling his or her story and encouraging people to tell their story, that is one way then to kind of help bring people closer to that border. Because if the border is the ultimate place of vitality and experiencing the holy, I think there are natural tendencies to avoid it if it may lead to vulnerability or pain.
Well, great discussion, and I hope we'll continue with this. And this kind of brings us also to a little bit of the next kind of area that I wanted to just highlight. This is actually a lengthy quote from the book, which I wanted to bring up. And I'm going to do the thing that you're never supposed to do in a presentation, which is to read the slide. But I'm going to go ahead and read the slide so that everyone doesn't have to. It says, the church wants not only sacramental rites and an icon of the universal priesthood, and I'll add, in the sacramental priesthood, a sacramental priest. It also wants those sacramental priests to be church leaders, business managers, experts in public relations, competent counselors, teachers, missioners, people skilled in facilitating the work of volunteers, spiritual directors, and so forth. If we load the seminary curriculum up with things to learn rather than with the central desideratum of growth in priesthood, the danger arises that the center comes to be lost in the maze of added material. Our problem today is how to locate the center anew and reaffirm its centrality. So, as a critical quote about how we form priests in the church. And Donald, I'm wondering if you have some thoughts on this.
Yes, we want our sacramental priests to have all their skill sets. I guess, I guess my response would be that, this center is the basic requirement. It's like the algebra 1, that if you don't have this basic this center, I think he's talking about if you don't have this basic sense of being at least on the journey of being connected with the holy at the border, and call to help other people have that same experience. I think that's basic. Then I think that the priesthood, the sacramental priesthood, is not your call. However, I mean, he would probably disagree with me. I would say that in and of itself is not sufficient for where we are in society, the church, and the world, and that you need to come to the table, or as you discern a call to ordain ministry, you need to come to the table with other skill sets, or at least other capacities. Now, one of the big issues right now, is theological education. Should that be kind of more spiritual and theological and academic, or should it be more practical? One of the things we do at ECF, and we have a variety of programs, is we kind of teach and train both lay and clergy leaders some of the practical aspects of, church administration, business matters, working with volunteers, leadership development. But I guess I would disagree, saying that while that center is important, if that's the only thing you bring to the table, you perhaps are not gonna make it in parish ministry in 2017. So see what people disagree with me on that. I mean, it's kind of given. It's kind of a given. You can't be an opera singer and not be able to read music. So that it's given that the person reads music. Now, how are they going to be the opera singer that we all want to hear? So.
Okay. Thank you, Donald. I mean, so what do you think? Here's the next slide. I mean, I would be very interested. People haven't self-identified in terms of whether or not the people who are on are lay or clergy, actually.
Or sacramental priests or fundamental priests, right?
Yes, exactly. Sacramental priests or fundamental priests. And so I would, first of all, I would love to hear from, I guess, a sacramental priest, since a majority of us, I'm sensing, are probably lay people. There was also a quote in the book about how, this question of whether Jesus would get through our ordination process today, given all the requirements that we have for clergy to be, all those roles. Now, another counterpoint to that would be that we're not asking our clergy to be Jesus. And in fact, the two are very different people. But I do think this question, just to play a little bit devil's advocate, is of, are we asking our clergy to do too much? Are we asking them to be skilled in too many different areas? And if we have to prioritize one or two areas, what would that be? And there are comments that are coming through from Linda and Sandy. Linda, I mean, basically, you're articulating the point that I've come to, which is the importance for leadership, because not everyone's going to be able to be gifted at all those things, the long list. So they have to be able to delegate or recruit and lift up individuals who have those gifts in that area.
Yeah, and I'm not saying the priests have to do all this, but I think they have to be able to facilitate or empower or engage kind of leadership teams to make it happen. Because and I agree in delegation, but I guess more and more it's kind of a shared role but if the priest as the designated or at least the compensated leader of the congregation doesn't at least have the capacity to facilitate and delegate and encourage and organize other people around, doing the work of ministry, they obviously need some training in making that happen. So I'm kind of clarifying my former statement, but I remember at one point someone saying that, my son's a priest, and they said, "Oh, your David is a brilliant priest." I said, "Yeah, tell me about it." This was his first cure. He said, "Well, he's a wonderful teacher, preacher, and pastor." I said, "Great, that's a great beginning." Because and not that those are important. I mean, we want our priests to be great preachers, teachers, sacramentalists, and pastors, but we also need priests who are going to give us a good kick in the rear end and help us recognize our fundamental priesthood, or my metaphor of kind of finding the holy at the border in kind of an active, mission-based way. So,
well, I love looking at the comments as well. I love that Sandy just identified herself as a fundamental priest here. So instead of using the term for a lay person, which I think is a great term as well.
You think if we use it enough, it'll spread throughout the church, and people will start referring to, "Oh, yeah, what do you do? I'm a fundamental priest."
A fundamental priest. Yes, I think that's great. Yeah. Yes, Sandy, I hope it spreads. Yes.
And it's not like what you do, it's kind of, who you are. So, we talk about community organizing skills, leadership development skills. That is, that doesn't mean piling more stuff on your plate. It means, I think it goes back to this, I think we can fit it into Countryman's idea of walking alongside people and saying, and discernment, and helping people discern their gifts and their passions, and then giving them permission or to just kind of make it happen.
I think read aloud Linda's comment. They also need to teach them to let their faith show through their robes. It's a provocative comment. Yes, I like that as well. Yeah. Well, you know, this was not, oftentimes ECF webinars and workshops tend to be very focused on practical aspects. But obviously this was not necessarily that type of book or that type of resource. But I do think there are some implications for how we live together as members of the church. And in reading through it again, or looking at some of my notes, I identified just a few, three, but I think most importantly, I'd love to hear what your kind of takeaways or next steps would be. So one would be, you know, remember the fundamental priesthood of all people when thinking about your own vocation. Maybe we need to, one follow-up step here would be to start claiming that as part of who we are. You know, I'm a member of the fundamental priesthood in this church. Encourage lay and clergy theological education opportunities. And, you know, Countryman noted that whenever when theological education is restricted only to the sacramental priesthood or diaconate, theology tends to get very churchy because that's where the majority of our clergy spend their time. But whenever we have lay people who are theologically educated, the scope of theology and reflection on how faith connects to life broadens beyond the church and starts to connect in really interesting and other ways. So there's a real benefit to having joint lay and clergy theological education. And then something for all of us to think about, you know, how do we avoid the clergy versus lay opposites game, where, you know, maybe we think in our mind, you know, all lay people are good and the clergies are misguided and bad, or the opposite. You know, that doesn't seem to be helping. And I think Countryman's solution to that, or sort of hope for that, is that we remember instead the relationship between the fundamental priesthood and the sacramental priesthood as being interdependent and related to one another and deeply connected. So, Donald, I mean, would there be another takeaway that you would have, or another sort of quote unquote next step?
No, I think that, I mean, you know, part of it is, and as I said, you know, one way to start this process is for people to tell their stories, and create kind of even small group opportunities for lay and clergy people together to kind of start that process. Because you know, you have to kind of do it in baby steps. The other thing, Miguel, I just was thinking about is, you know, we're celebrating the 500th anniversary of the Reformation this year, you know, Martin Luther, and obviously it's gotten kind of warped or perverted or watered down over the years. But a lot of what Luther was talking about were a lot of these ideas that Countryman has in his book. You know, even the whole idea of, you know, the scripture in the vernacular, you know, where common lay folk could read the scripture and kind of interpret it in their daily lives. So maybe we need to look at our Reformed roots as Episcopalians, as well as our Catholic roots, but maybe we need to go back to, you know, who we are as Anglicans, as Reformed Anglicans, as Reformed Catholics. You know, maybe that goes back to the idea of getting back to some of the theological ideas of who we are and how we came to be. A lot of it being the fact that the role of clergy, the role of the priest was very different than what was happening 5 years ago in the Roman Church. So that was just kind of a historical reflection. And also, remembering that these approaches could be really helpful as we navigate some very challenging times in our country, in our world, where people who are just kind of overwhelmed with what's going on need to have those experiences of the holy, and that we need to create opportunities wherever people are on kind of the partisan political spectrum. I think everyone in our communities need opportunities to connect with each other, and as fundamental priests, we have an obligation to help people navigate that border holiness. So even if it's just having a kind of non-confrontational conversation with someone who may disagree with you politically about how we as Christians could support each other during very challenging times, might also be a good first step.
Great, thank you. And a few comments here, and we do have a little bit of time. Sandy, we are in the midst of a culture shift in the church, and these changes are not always coming easily. We see what direction to move in, but opening up is so hard for so many. Linda, I think members would want a different word than lay priest. Priest has too many things assigned to it, and the word lay has too little respect. Yes, yeah, and there would be some, yes, yeah. Nomenclature's hard around this issue. Okay, well, thank you so much for I think to everyone for taking the time to read this book. I hope it was a valuable experience for everyone. I know I really enjoyed reading it. I think I've spent February really reading parts of it, and just loved having the chance to kind of get immersed in his thoughts there. Brendan, would you like to just kind of give us some final details?
Yes. Well, again, thank you everyone for taking the time out of your schedules to be part of this, our first book club online meeting and discussion. Thank you especially for those of you who contributed your comments and your voice to the dialogue this evening. As this was the first, we are interested to know what you thought. Please reach out to us, let us know your comments and your thoughts about that. We would love to know if this is something you'd like to see more of, or if you have any other suggestions for us for future programming with our webinars. We also sit down and review all the comments that we get to plan out our future webinars and offerings. So again, thanks for attending. We'll be posting more webinars in our third quarter in June, and look forward to seeing you again online. Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.